Good evening. The polls are closed, the counts are underway, and before long we'll know the result of the general election that is set to shape the future of the UK generations for generations to come.
Welcome to Bournemouth University and an election night with a difference. A broadcast prepared and delivered by young people for young people. We'll be with you through the night. We have journalism students positioned at counts throughout the UK, TV production students behind the cameras, and politics students analysing the results as they come in.
We will also be joined by guests here in the studio, and we will be hooking up with other universities across the country. So join us every half hour on the Buzz News website, on YouTube and on social media for this historic student-led election night coverage.
Earlier today, the party leaders joined millions of people across the country in casting their votes. Boris Johnson broke with tradition to cast his vote near Downing Street instead of at his constituency. It means the Prime Minister has chosen not to vote for himself. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn voted in Islington North. Know which of these two men will receive the keys to Downing Street.
Now, let's go straight to some breaking news. Within the last minute, broadcasters have released their early exit polls. These could offer us a glimpse of how the night will unfold. Let's go across to Melissa Spence in our newsroom to find out what we know so far.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Seconds ago, the Conservative Party are looking to win with a majority of 86 seats. Now, the Conservatives are looking to have 361 seats and Labour having 191, with SNP having 55, the Liberal Democrats with 13 and other with 19. Now, the question everybody's asking are how are the polls accurate? Now, the exit poll is the most accurate with polling technologies advancing. Now, they asked people who have voted, not people who are still deciding. Now, last year, the poll was 4 seats off. So rest assured that the polls are extremely accurate. That's all we have now here. Thank you. Back to you in the studio.
Well, there you have it. Exit polls are predicting a Conservative majority. It's important to reiterate, these polls are only predictions, not the final results, but they do give us plenty to discuss already. We're joined now by political analyst Dr. Dan Jackson. Dan, your first reaction to these exit polls?
It's a bigger majority than I think most people were expecting. The opinion polls in recent weeks have kind of, about 2 weeks ago they reflected whereabouts we are now, but we were sensing they'd narrowed by the time we actually got to the vote in the last week. What this poll tells us is that they've kind of gone back to the opinion polls where we were about 2 weeks ago. I think the pollsters have had some pretty average elections, and the referendum, of course, they got quite wildly wrong. I think this will be reasonably reassuring for those in the polling industry. But of course, it also has huge political consequences as well. So do you think these political consequences could be to do with Boris Johnson's, maybe his Brexit deal or anything? For sure. He called this election in order to resolve the Brexit deadlock, and it has done that. He has resolved, I say he, the party has seemingly resolved the Brexit deadlock in that they've now got the majority to be able to pass their Brexit deal in Parliament so that we can get Brexit done. But of course we will, tune in, folks, for lots more Brexit twists and turns, because getting that withdrawal agreement through is just the start.
Now, some will be shocked at the results because obviously in the last couple of days there's been a huge push for tactical voting, and there was a huge youth turnout today. What do you think that says about maybe the youth vote in general? Yeah, you're right. There's been a large push, I think, particularly in the last week of the campaign. Once I think the other parties, the non-conservative parties, have realised, it's kind of desperate now. We would like to get the majority, but if not, we're going to have to work together somehow to get some working majority or coalition between the parties that aren't the Conservatives. So yes, there's been a big push. We might have thought this might have been the first election where the first election since 1997 where tactical voting has played an important part.
doesn't look like it has been. Of course, we'll see there'll be nuances once we get to see the outcomes of particular constituencies and so on. But it seems that from the macro level, that tactical voting hasn't had a decisive impact on this election.
Do you think the truth and deception in their campaigns, do you think that kind of forced maybe almost Boris to kind of win? Or, well,
yeah.
Potentially?
Hard to know. Hard to know yet until we get survey results from the British election study. But certainly, I think it's fair to say it wasn't a great election campaign for the truth. And you know, we would like to think after the referendum campaign, in particular, and then, you know, to a lesser extent the 2017 election, that the standard of campaigning and the consequences of mistruth or outright disinformation would come at a political cost. To me, one of the kind of characteristics of a post-truth environment is where you can say things which aren't true and get away with it. And it seems that this election is one where, you know, we've seen some, particularly the Conservative Party, in the way that they've emulated a fact-checking website, for instance, during an election debate.
This is proving to be extremely a huge catastrophe for the Labour Party. They are projected to lose 71 seats. What do you think this means for Corbyn's leadership and the Labour Party as a whole?
It means probably change.
Do you think he'll step down as leader?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, if recent history is anything to go by, losing leaders tend to step down pretty quickly. My hunch is that he won't immediately step down, as we saw Ed Miliband in 2015, or David Cameron straight after the referendum. I would expect that he might hang on a little bit, but I mean, I would expect a change of leadership in Labour.
Well, thank you very much. That was Dr. Dan Jackson. Now, despite being the group least likely to vote in the UK elections, 18 to 24-year-olds have today made sure to challenge that. Amy Batt has more.
Rumblings have been felt across the country as young people turn out to cast their votes. Trending nationwide on Twitter, the hashtag YouthQuake is flooding with pictures and videos of young voters heading to the polling stations to make their voices heard. People are claiming the queues are the biggest they've ever seen, with students at universities in places like Kent and Exeter standing in the pouring rain. In London, some braved harsh conditions, having to wade through puddles on their route to the polls. But the young voters weren't the only ones trending. Hashtag OldQuake was also popular as older generations took to the site to make their presence felt.
Just a reminder now of our top story. A BBC exit poll is predicting a victory for Conservatives in the UK general election. Let's get some more reaction to this now. Burke Eyal is on the sofas.
I'm joined by Aaron Goldsmith and Byron Stewart, who are politics students. So guys, what are your views on these exit polls?
Well, I think first of all, we need to create caution, because obviously these are only exit polls. These are not the real results. Anything we say here may mean nothing, but it may also mean a lot. Now, the SNP clearly have repeated their 2015 performance and have dominated Scotland, which therefore means that the Conservatives have clearly would have dominated England and Wales. But the most interesting thing for me, because we were talking about the Lib Dems, I mean, that coming into the election, they're polling really well. They've only gained one seat, and I think that's going to be massive in the Conservatives getting that majority.
So now, Byron, could you explain more to our viewers about, tactical voting?
Yeah, essentially, tactical voting is in marginal seats, parties will implore voters to vote for the party that's more likely to oust the incumbent party rather than perhaps the party that you would usually support. And in the UK, we've seen a group called the Progressive Alliance, which has grown, and that it was the Greens, to a certain extent Labour, and the Lib Dems previously. I think it included Plaid Cymru in this election. And without Labour, and it was essentially vote for the party that will beat the Tories. And I think if we're going off this exit poll, it doesn't look like it's worked that well.
I think what we also, when it comes to tactical voting, we need to talk about the Brexit Party. They didn't stand in the Conservative seats, and I think that possibly some pundits have sort of theorised that the Brexit Party would take Conservatives' votes, but I think with this exit poll, it really shows that the Brexit Party has probably taken a lot of Labour votes that didn't want to vote Conservative but wants to get Brexit done.
Byron, is there any evidence that tactical voting actually does work?
If we're going off this poll, I'd say no. And if we're going off the last election, I think the Lib Dems only won, was it 4 or 5 seats?
Four seats.
4 seats in the last election. The Greens in the last election only maintained the same seat that they had before. So I would say that there isn't much evidence to suggest that tactical voting does work at all.
I mean, what do you make of the results?
Well, I think coming from a neutral standpoint, of course, this is going to mean that Brexit is going to be fast-tracked. I think that what's going to happen is we're going to have a very different map. I think there are seats in the north like Great Grimsby, Wrexham in Wales may change, which is, I mean, Great Grimsby hasn't been Conservative since 1945, and it's really looking like it's going to change. I think places like Stoke, which has 3 seats in there, Stoke-on-Trent, it's likely that all 3 will probably go Conservative. And previous to this election, there was only 1. I think that the Conservatives are going to absolutely dominate the south and make a lot of ground in the north.
Byron?
I think that if the SNP do as well as they're predicted to do, they're going to be pushing for another independence referendum. I don't know if it will happen at all, but I think it's something they're going to push for, because clearly that's what they ran for. They ran in Scotland on a mandate of pushing for another independence referendum, and they've gained, what was it, 55 seats from this exit poll?
It's up 20.
Up 20 seats, 255 in the exit poll, so I think that they will be pushing for another independence referendum.
And just to add to that, with the SNP having such a big surge, obviously the Conservatives had, a decent amount of seats, so Labour not so much in Scotland. So the Conservatives are going to have an offset of Scotland that will happen in England and Wales. And Wales, I think, in Northern Wales, with like the Beta Clwyd, which was Conservative in 2015, the Clwyd South, which is very likely to, with the exit poll, would probably go Conservative, and places like Gower, which has a very high chance of going Conservative, I think they're going to do tremendous strides within Wales as well as England.
I mean, what do you think about Boris Johnson not voting in his own constituency?
Well, I think I believe he voted in Downing Street, which somewhat could be tactical voting. I mean, it's only 1 vote, obviously, so it's not going to have a humongous impact. But you know what they say, 1 raindrop raises the sea. So I think that may have been a bit of tactical, because they're trying to gain a bit more stature within London, because London, within the last few elections, has been very Labour city. It'll be very interesting to see what happens now, because Dagenham is probably going to go Conservative, possibly a couple of more seats like Ilford North. And with how the Lib Dems were set to do, I mean, they're set to get a few seats in London. It'll be very interesting to see if the Conservatives can hold those seats. So I know that Richmond Park is probably going to go Lib Dem, with the majority being so slight, but there are other seats like Sutton which are going to be very close.
Byron, any opinions on that?
I think Boris Johnson voting in Downing Street rather than for himself is unprecedented, right? It's never happened before.
I believe so.
And so I don't think it'll set a precedent. You don't think it'll happen again?
I think that, no, I don't. I mean,
I think
constitutionally,
they usually vote in this, where they're from,
constitutionally, you have to live in your constituency to hold the seat. So the fact he didn't vote there is very interesting. I want to know a bit more about that person.
Yeah, it caught me off guard.
Very much so.
So, what you expecting for parties? But less on that. Back to the main studio.
That's it for our first broadcast. The exit polls are predicting a victory for the Conservative Party, but there are sure to be plenty of twists and turns to come.
Join us again at 10:30 on Buzz News for more coverage from our election centre here at Bournemouth University.
See you then. Welcome back to Bournemouth University and to a special night of student-led election coverage. I'm Claire Bode.
And I'm Georgina Barnes. Our top stories this evening. Counting is underway in the UK general election, with exit polls predicting a massive majority for the Conservatives with 368 seats. Polls are suggesting that Labour will secure their lowest number of seats since 1935. And in Scotland, the SNP are predicted to take all but 4 seats with a record 55.
Let's get some more reactions to those early exit polls. We're now with political analyst Aaron Goldsmith. Aaron, what are the key takeaways from the exit polls?
Well, first of all, obviously the SNP are going to have a massive landslide like in 2015, where they, again, also actually got 55 seats. What this will mean is that there's going to be a massive map change within England and Wales. Conservatives will probably take a lot of seats in the north and Wales, and also keeping a lot of key seats in the south.
Now, exit polls, they have had a history of being not as accurate, but as time's gone on, they have got increasingly more accurate. So when it was first introduced in 1974, the Labour Party were expected to have a majority of 130, but instead had a majority of 3. Now, obviously, a lot's changed over that time. In 2007, the exit poll only was wrong by about a margin of about 4 seats. So how reliable do you think this exit poll is?
Well, since 1997, they've been very good at predicting results. I think the last one that was a bit iffy was 2015, where they actually downplayed the Conservatives, but it was still the closest one to the actual results. Actually, the Conservatives haven't got a majority in a exit poll since 1987, sorry, with Margaret Thatcher. So it's a very important thing for this election. Obviously, this isn't the real result. This is only a exit poll, but I think that John Curtis, since taking over in 2005, has done a fantastic job at predicting elections. So I think this is probably going to be somewhat accurate.
Now, it seems that this election might have become somewhat of a Brexit election. Labour's John McDonnell on BBC a couple of minutes ago said that this was definitely a Brexit election and has played a huge role. What do you think about Labour's Brexit strategy could have let them down?
Well, I mean, I'm first of all going to start off with his notion that this was a Brexit election, because a lot of people are saying this is a climate election, this is a Brexit election, or this is an election of the North. I think that with the indications that it's probably a Brexit election, and if we're going to be honest, 52% of people in 2016 voted Leave, and one of the main Leave parties has won, which sort of says a lot of things. Obviously, this isn't going to be the same levels as it was in 2016, but it can give you an indication. But I think one of the biggest issues was that with Labour, they had a massive issue where the North seats voted Brexit and the southern seats voted Remain. So that they had to try to appease both, and in the end, it looks like they haven't really appeased anyone.
Now, Priti Patel has said that now that the Brexit bill will be ready before Christmas. Do you think this is an entirely achievable goal?
Well, I think that what happens to happen is the MPs are sworn in, then they have an introduction, and I think that, if I'm going to be honest, I don't think it'll be done by Christmas. I think that will be heading into the new year, where they'll put it in to Parliament, and they'll have plenty of time to debate it this time.
And obviously, the poll has said that Lib Dem will be gaining 1 seat since 2017. What's your opinions on that?
Well, I think the Lib Dems sort of had a disadvantage because Labour moved towards a second referendum, which sort of played into their sort of area where they're trying to focus on. I mean, they were part of the Remain alliance, which was the Green Party and Plaid Cymru and them. I think that this is very interesting because they're set to gain a certain amount of seats, where everyone's predicting they're going to take Richmond, they're going to take Cheltenham, they're going to take other seats. And clearly, if this indication is anything, it's that they haven't done that and they've failed, which will be very interesting because Jo Swinson said that she was going to remain no matter what. I'm not sure if she can remain if she's only gained 1 seat when the Lib Dems, at the beginning of the election, were polling just below Labour.
And what do you think about the Green Party keeping their 1 seat, most probably?
It's most probably going to be Brighton Pavilion. Yeah. It's expected. They're not really expected to win any more seats. What they're kind of keening for right now is an increase in vote share, because the more votes you get, the more money you get for the next election.
Now, back to the Lib Dems, obviously they were expecting, at some points they were saying 50 to 100 seats. Do you think this could mean that sort of the age of the Liberal Democrats could be coming to an end?
Well, I mean, Jo Swinson started off the campaign saying, I'm going to be Prime Minister. So, I mean, we've come a bit farther. I think that a lot of people were projecting a 50 seat for the Lib Dems because Jeremy Corbyn at the start of the election was perceiving to be not so great. I mean, they had to have an election strategy change halfway through. Polling indicates he wasn't winning any of the debates. In fact, if you go into specific issues, he only won, I think, 2 or 3 issue-based polling. So I think that really says a lot about, you know, where we started off, how it's come. I think that at the end of the day, the Lib Dems are in a very sticky situation. They really, I say, should have done better.
Okay, thank you very much to Aaron. Now, throughout the night, you'll be able to keep right up to date with the results on our website, www.buzz.bournemouth.ac.uk, and join the conversation on social media using our hashtag #OurTime19.
Now, let's go to our online team now and to Roxanne Cooper. What has the reaction been like so far?
So, the reaction to the exit poll has been huge, with tweets flooding in every second. Hashtag Corbyn out is trending alongside Goodbye NHS right now. The exit poll has come out with 368 votes to the Conservatives, with Labour on 191. If correct, this would be the biggest Tory win since 1983. People have been queuing up since up to 10 p.m. to be able to vote tonight, but we have to remember that the exit poll only asks 20,000 people across 144 polling stations, so this is just a sample. The reaction on Twitter is proving quite interesting at the moment, with many people being unhappy with the result. We also have to remember that social media tends to sway more towards the left, so this is a reflection of this. One person has tweeted that the Conservatives won the poll, but Labour won Twitter. Some Conservative voters have taken to the site to express their delight, but this is few and far between to be found on the platform right now. One person tweeted, "One thing that could make this better is if the Conservatives won, but Boris Johnson lost his seat." Instagram is also rife with the reaction to the exit polls, with many being shocked at the predicted loss of 71 Labour seats. Nicola Sturgeon has taken to Twitter to talk about the exit poll, suggesting it was a good night for the SNP, but this is just an exit poll and there are many marginals, so we just have to wait and see. She says what it's indicated UK-wide is now grim. Someone tweeted back to this, "Can I come to Scotland?" Speaking of marginal seats, they hold places like Bolton West, Southampton Itchen, Newcastle under Lyme and Dudley North, so they are places that we need to watch closely tonight. It's been predicted that Youthquake is the cause of much of this Labour leftness on Twitter, with over 1,300 tweets with hashtag Youthquake just before the polls closed. Many suggesting that the Conservative Party are worried about how the youth vote could affect the results of this 2019 election, but we can only wait and see how that pans out. According to Government Live statistics on voter registration, just under 1.5 million people, under the age of 34 applied to register from the last month of the poll. So it'll be very interesting to see how this pans out.
Now, what would election coverage be without a big map? Let's head over to our resident cartographer, Catherine Clark, and have a look at some of the key regions which could help swing the final results.
Good evening, this is Catherine Clark for Buzz News, and we are here to present the election map. Last snap election, called in 2017 by Theresa May, the Conservative Party won the most seats but resulted in a hung parliament in conjunction with the DUP. Forget last year's map. We're going to wipe the slate clean and have a quick look at what could be in store for the next referendum. Hypothetically, if Scotland win 55 out of the 59 constituencies, this is what it could look like. The majority of Scots voted in favour of staying in the EU in the 2016 referendum at 62%, giving the SNP an advantage over the other to remain. The other parties to remain.
It's been an election campaign riddled with accusation of lies, and whereas voters and journalists have had to negotiate a minefield of misinformation, politicians have been accused of embracing fake news for their own political ends. I'm joined now by NewsQuest editorial director Toby Granville and Anna Torsen. So, Toby, can you? What are your reactions to the polls? Both of you. What are your reactions to the polls?
Well, I mean, a new exit poll, it looks quite interesting. It's just come out. I mean, I thought that the Tories might just get over the line, but I was quite surprised by this exit poll. I mean, what's your view?
I think if you had asked me 3 months ago, I would have said this is probably where you might expect, predicting a kind of, serious landslide for the Conservatives. as the campaign went on, I think this was looking increasingly unlikely, actually. And even at the start, you might have said this would have been really at the top end, high end of the kind of most optimistic prediction, if you like. If this turns out to be true, then it will be a major upset for the other parties who thought they were eating into that kind of majority of the lead that Boris Johnson had. But it is just an exit poll. But I think the margin of error here really means that we are going to end up with a serious Conservative majority regardless.
Yeah, I mean, I think having looked at it today, when I woke up this morning to go down the polling station, I actually thought, I bet Boris Johnson wished that his campaign finished a week ago, and that he'd chosen December the 5th instead of December the 12th because of the weather, and everything seemed to be against him and the week that he had had. But then suddenly we get an exit poll looking like that, but then you can't believe everything you see in an exit poll.
That's true, and it's hard to know how much of that kind of, which is pretty poor last week, isn't it, really, for Johnson, and whether or not that actually affected him at all or not. And I think there's an element there of something around his persona and his type of and his style of campaigning, actually, where these kinds of things that we might perceive as sort of mistakes, gaffes and so forth, actually just makes him more popular amongst his core voters. You see the similarities with Trump there, where you kind of think any other politician would have been kind of finished had they said or done half the kind of things that they do. And actually what you end up with is that just kind of mobilizes and enthuses their supporter.
Toby, I just wanted to get onto, can you tell me why you had to make a stand against political party papers?
Yeah, well, what happened was the Basingstoke Gazette editor highlighted on Twitter that that the Lib Dems in her area had basically produced a newspaper called the Gazette, and hadn't called it the Lib Dem Gazette. They'd called it, the West Hampshire Gazette. It looked exactly like the Gazette newspaper, and there was a very small imprint which all political parties have to put on their publications that you could barely read. So there was no suggestion to anybody that was a real that was a fake newspaper, and ironically, when this actual election campaign has been very much built on trust has been a key, fundamental policy for all of the party leaders. Meanwhile, you've got this situation where, and not just the Lib Dems, in fact, all other political parties as well were involved in doing this, in passing off these fake newspapers as if they were real trusted local newspapers, which completely undermines trusted local news altogether. So, we had to make a stand, and as a consequence of that stand, we managed to get other examples from around the country, from other newspaper groups, where this practice was going on with the other parties and more of what Lib Dem was doing. And we've actually now contacted the Electoral Commission, because my view is that, by the time the next election comes around again, we need to make sure that there's rules and regulations, put in place to stop this kind of practice from happening again.
I absolutely agree. I think it's appalling practice. It's particularly acute in local news because of the important position of local newspapers and local radio as well. But this is obviously playing out in relation to local newspapers, in relation to the healthy functioning of democratic societies. Local journalism is absolutely at core of that, and any sense of threat or undermining the credibility and trust in that is hugely problematic. But we're also seeing that in the online sphere, right? So we're seeing it with the Conservative HQ turning their Twitter account into the fact check during the first televised debate, right? And that's a similar kind of idea that they're playing into the kind of narrative of trust.
Yeah.
And their own definition of truth claims and so forth, and that's again deeply problematic. And somehow they just sort of shrugged it off and got away with a bit of a warning.
Thank you for talking to me about that. And now we're off back to the studio.
Now that's it for now. We'll be back again at 11 o'clock for more breaking news and analysis. Join us then.